Hi, everybody. David Allen here with Dave Edwards. Again, if you've been
Dave.
tracking us, um, Dave is poking at me on a regular basis, which is great. Saying, we need to talk more about X, Y, and Z. So I go, sure, let's do that. Since he's got an ex NPR, guy and professional, radio guy, he's good at this stuff. So Dave, for people who haven't maybe heard of you or seen us yet, maybe they're new on this recording. What do you want people to know about you?
Well, that's you're turning the tables. That's not really fair. I'm used to asking the questions. Well, to be honest with you, for 30 plus years, I've been in the broadcast business, mostly on the journalism side. Worked as a journalist, did a lot of work for NPR here in the States. Then moved into management, became a program director and a news director, and eventually was the general manager of Milwaukee Public Radio for quite a few years. And along the way, I was with NPR as their chairman of their board. So I've seen NPR from a number of different sides. And I retired 2 years ago, retired in air quotes, because I'm still doing some consulting and some writing and about productivity and leadership and management issues. And I'm a big proponent of getting things done. And so I'm just grateful that I get to spend a little time with you periodically.
Yay. Okay. Well, anybody listening to this probably knows who I am. So, I don't need to go into much more depth than that. So, okay, let me toss the ball to you where you can poke at me. Dave, what should we talk about this time? What's on your mind?
Well, my aha moment at the very beginning of GTD was when I heard you say, your mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. And I always say, for me, that's the core of GTD. And I know that it starts with a mind sweep and capture, getting everything out of your head. Is that the way, when you first created or developed GTD, did you see that as a kind of the foundational beginning of the productivity system?
It was, because I didn't make that one up. I had a mentor, Dean Atchison. I attribute that to Dean, and in my book, he's still a friend. And he was a longtime executive consultant. He was a consultant in the organizational change world, particularly. He worked with organizations to walk them through a model about how to focus on their future. And he had uncovered the technique that he found a lot of executives that he worked with, especially at the top level, had trouble making decisions about stuff. And they were kind of hung up about a number of things. And at some point, and as Dean says, it was a sort of a frustrating moment. He was trying to work with an executive, and the guy just had a bunch of stuff he was avoiding thinking about or dealing with. And Dean just had him sit down and write down everything that was on his mind, and on separate pieces of paper. And then he had them go through each one of those and say, okay, what's the next action on this? And, and that's where the sort of do it, delegate it, dump it, or defer it, sort of came in. And so Dean really taught me that. He did all this as a preliminary process to clear the deck organizationally for people. He said, because organizations seem to be, it's kind of like barnacles on a boat, just accumulate this stuff that just creates drag on the system. And so, building a process that allowed people to kind of get rid of the drag on their system was something Dean really uncovered. And he taught that to me. That was when I was beginning my own consulting practice, and I ran across Dean in my network. He became a good mentor of mine, and we worked together very closely for a couple of years and did, quite a number of processes together with clients. And so I got to watch how powerful that was. So that was my initiation to the collect process, was just to do that. And that was all just preliminary to sort of clear the deck so that the organization had clear framework or clearer psyches, essentially, to then be able to focus on the future. Because if you've got a lot of old business hanging around you, like barnacles around your neck, or like albatrosses around your neck, it's very difficult to then focus on the future with any kind of organic clarity. And so, Dean had just come up with that as a way to, sort of clean up the organization so that it could make the kind of changes that we wanted. So he sat down with me. He said, David, let me walk you through the process. So he did. I sat down. I wasn't out of control. My life was pretty okay, and I was pretty well organized. But I had Dean walk me through the process of writing everything down that was still on my mind on separate pieces of paper, throwing them in my in basket, and then going through each one of them and making next action decisions about them. And blew me away. I went, oh my God, that is so incredible. The change in the psyche, the change in what happens and how you feel, and the sense of space and the sense of clarity, the sense of control that showed up was fascinating to me. I mean, like, wow. So, I got involved in doing a lot of work with Dean, where we were doing that kind of process, as well as a lot of the organizational change consulting. But I watched how powerful that process was, because we just started at the top. First we go in with the organization, and we'd start with the top person, and we would walk them through this process until they was totally empty. And sometimes it took a half a day, and sometimes it took 3 days, depending on how much stuff the person had. And then we would rapidly go through each one of their direct reports, because as they're going through all this stuff, they're generating all kinds of things, delegating and moving things forward or whatever. It's like, oh my God. So we had to run real fast, because they were starting to overwhelm all the direct reports to the CEO.
Yeah.
So we had to run fast to each one of them, and then do that same process with them. And then we had to run fast to all of their direct reports and do the same thing with them. And we literally did that through the whole organization. And I watched how transformational that was.
I remember after reading the book and deciding to set some time to do a mind sweep, I remember initially, I thought I was, I had things in control. I found initially that getting the ideas from out of my head, it started very slowly, like almost as if my brain was resisting letting go of everything. But then once I kind of got started, it was like, Katie barred the door. It was just nonstop. And I probably filled up a pad in no time at all. I wonder if initially our brain resists giving it up.
Oh, I think so, for sure. It's another version. Over all these years, I've discovered it's another version of sort of confronting your own reality, and that can be challenging for people. It's funny, people get mad at me for their list. I go, excuse me, that's not my list, that's your list. I just got you to identify it. Don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah.
And so I think people resist. I'm not sure all the reasons that they do, other than sort of confronting essentially the level of your own commitments.
Well, we don't resist putting items on a calendar. We don't try to put that into our head.
True. But that's because the price of missing an appointment is too severe. Right. The price of not getting cat food is only if the cat scratches your eyes out for some reason, because they're hungry, or the price of not making a decision about should we adopt or should we divorce, or should we hire the vice president or not. Those things don't come at you in the same way that a calendared commitment does. If it's missed, or if you're not engaging with it appropriately. So there's a lot more subtlety to this than I think most people realize. So most people, frankly, don't have any clue about how many things they've committed to, how many would, could, shoulds, need tos, ought tos that they've actually generated in their life. And, that's been fascinating to me to see how much that is. And as, many of you may have heard who are watching and listening to this, that over the years, we discovered it takes somewhere between 1 to 6 hours for most mid to senior level professionals anyway, to just do a mind sweep. Not to organize it, not to prioritize it, not to do anything about that, but just to identify the would, could, should, need tos, ought tos. Oh yeah, I might want to. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Oh yeah, I gotta. And to externalize all of that, is yeah, it's a fascinating process, and it has a lot to do with I think I've people have heard me mention Oliver Berkman's book, The Antidote, which has a lot to do with sort of acceptance of current reality. His subtitle is The Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. So it's more like, hey, the nunu stuff is fine, except if you can't accept that you're depressed or that you're broke or that you don't have, or XYZ, that an acceptance of whatever your current reality is absolutely critical for forward motion. What you resist, you're stuck with. And a lot of people resist the things they've committed to. They resist thinking about it. They resist making decisions about it, but it's still spinning in there. And they're still stuck with that. And that creates this subliminal spin. That's why, interestingly, Dave, as you may know, my second edition, I changed the word. My first edition of the book, Getting Things Done, I used the word collect as stage one. I changed the word to capture. The reason is collect is somewhat of a passive thing. And that's where we just walk around and see the stuff you let accumulate. Like if we went to your basement, we'd find out what you collected, right?
Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah. Sorry, but that's a kind of a passive thing. If I said capture, it might be ideas that you have had about what to do with your basement. Right. It's a more creative, it's a more proactive, essentially, a word to me. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes what people really need to capture is thoughts that they have had about what they should or might want to do. Whereas it's not that obvious. They were just collecting stuff around them. Mm-hmm. It's a more subtle spin, essentially, on the idea. Much like journaling. If you journal, which is quite healthy, to sit down and just take pen and paper or however you might want to journal. It's another version of capturing. It's kind of like cleaning out your psyche. Sometimes the unconscious, just do that. I've journaled off and on for years, and I don't even go back and read them. I've collected them, so they're still around somewhere in case I might write my memoirs at some point. It probably might be useful to go back and see some of the stuff as I was thinking about it as I was writing it. But mostly it was just a way to unload, just flush the psyche, if you will.
So and that's a more
that's a more creative process than just gathering stuff around your desk you let collect from there.
Right. So when you've worked with these senior executives and you've walked them through the process, is part of it cathartic in the sense that you see for the first time how many commitments you've made, how many things you're really supposed to be working on, and kind of come to the realization that maybe I can't do it all?
Well, that's one of the ahas people get. Well, come on, anybody listening or watching this at some point has made a list and felt better.
Right.
And
or so felt worse.
Yeah, well, worse and better. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, wow, I feel worse, but wow, I'm really glad I got that out of my head.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad I've got the list. And if anybody reverse engineered that, why did they feel better? Why did they feel more in control, more focused, more whatever? That's generally what happens if you're feeling confused and overwhelmed, you sit down and make a list. Oh, okay. And it doesn't mean it made things easy. It just made it conscious. And, again, your head's a crappy office. So what that does is it takes the stuff out of that crappy office and puts it into a more conscious office, which is your conscious mind, that can then evaluate that stuff. Because if you're keeping it inside your psyche, that place has no sense of past or future. So that stuff just spins and wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning when you can't do anything about it. There's no past or future mode in there. So there's a part of your subliminal psyche that thinks you should be doing every single thing that's ever been on your mind, that's not finished yet. Boy, talk about overwhelm.
Right.
So that's, yeah. So that's one of the things that happens is people kind of go, oh my God, but it's that same feeling of getting stuff out of your head that you know, if you're cooking a Christmas dinner for a family and you want to make a grocery list, you're not going to keep that in your head.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why should you? Why could you? I mean, you can't. You can't organize that, prioritize that. You know, walk down the supermarket or the organic market aisles and, you know, make appropriate decisions. The thing is, once you actually make a list, then it makes you, it frees you up to be a lot more creative and get stuff that's not even on the list.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you don't, if you don't have the list, that some part of you is trying to remember the list. Well, that's kind of a stupid use of your brain. You know.
So what ideas? I mean, are there things that, you know, through a mind sweep or a process like this, that, you know, we should be aware of, but not necessarily capture? In other words, just let it go, or maybe use it in a journal, or, you
Oh
know what I
yeah,
mean? 'Cause you
yeah,
can
yeah.
write down too many things.
Yeah, yeah, no, I hear that and I get that. And I think that depends on people who are more highly associative in their thinking. That idea reminds me of that idea, reminds me of that idea. You know, on the far end of that spectrum would be the ADD and ADHD, you know, kind of syndromes. Um, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those usually very highly creative people and oftentimes very successful people, especially if they've discovered strategies to be able to then manage that high associative, you know, kind of thinking. But that it's one once you start to become conscious about what you capture. This a little off the question you asked, but once I started to get the fact that if I actually made a commitment with you and I have to write it down, I'm too lazy. So it made me stop and think, do I really want to make that commitment? Because if I do, I'm going to have to write it down. Right. So I go, well, Dave, can you take a maybe if it happens to show up organically, you know? And if you say, yeah, then fine, you know. And a lot of stuff I don't need to write down. I don't write down anything that either I don't care that there's something later I might, would, could, should need to decide or do about it. Many times, most of the day, I'm just grazing. Oh, that's kind of cool. I'm looking at my window right now. It's sunny afternoon in Amsterdam. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, but
I'm
you're at
not
a different
writing.
stage of your life where you're allowed to do more of that. If you're an executive with hundreds of people reporting to you or thousands of people reporting to you and a board that's looking at your bottom line, I mean, you have to be more focused, don't you?
Well, sure, but if you've gotten to that point to begin with, you already know that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's why a lot of executives are somewhat, at least those that are somewhat lifelong learners, they're willing to say, okay, I need to get better at this. You know, some of them just have figured out, okay, I've made my game. I don't need to get any better. I'm going to retire anyway, so who cares?
Yeah.
But some of them that say, wow, I still need to get better at my game or at the game that I'm in right now, or there's a new game I want to be able to move into. Or even some of those who retired find themselves busier than they ever were before. You know,
Tell me about it.
they're now on three boards, and they've started a not-for-profit themselves, and they've got grandkids that they want to advance, all kinds of stuff.
Right, right.
So the capture, what you that there is stuff to capture won't stop.
Mm-hmm.
It may get less and less, but it's still, it's still there, and it can get pretty subtle. You know, I coached a CEO of a very successful cosmetic company that had its footprint both in the U.S. and Mexico, and they, I coached him for 2 or 3 days, I think, just going through all this stuff, and finally, I was sort of going through his different horizons just to see, did we really have everything? And so, as you know, the horizons that I identified, that where we have commitments, gets pretty subtle. So we went up to the principles and purposes. Okay, anything about your higher values in terms of your company and what you're doing, what you guys are doing that we haven't captured yet? He had one of those oh my God moments, because he and his partner always supported some sort of a not-for-profit in Mexico for disadvantaged kids, for whatever, and they tried to start an orphanage, but given bureaucratic stuff, it had been blocked. So they didn't actually have anything on the books, or they didn't have anything in the works. And he went, "Oh my God, I didn't realize." Yes, that's a really important thing for me. And that's why, it wasn't so much collect, it was really a capture.
Mhm.
Ah, there was an aha, there's something that's been going on that I have not been that conscious about. Now I need to be more conscious of it. And so we, wrote it down. And we got, find, R&D new in NGO for Mexico. So that's the kind of stuff that tends to happen, when you're working with people at that level of game.
Mhm. So a couple of other things related to capture that I wanted to cover. First of all, one of the things, and I've been guilty of this as anybody else, but I've heard this from other people, that when you're doing a capture session, or as I call it, my brain dump session, there is a tendency, at least for me, to sometimes want to combine all the steps. Like I capture something, well, I quick want to clarify it. I want to organize it, and maybe even when I want to get started on it. It's like once the idea hits, your brain wants to keep
Sure.
progressing. You know,
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, that happens.
I don't find that to be. I mean, it distracts me from the process. But I mean, why do we do that, or how can we get ourselves to stick to the process?
Well, if you got plenty of time, you don't need to bother.
Well,
Fine.
that's true.
Run down whatever rabbit holes you want for as long as you want. Back in travel days, I had a 10-hour flight, to LA. I just gave myself permission to run down as many rabbit holes as long as I wanted till we landed. That was great. So there was
Yeah.
no need to have to compress the process,
Hmm.
into any one particular thing. The problem is, though, if you're trying to run down those rabbit holes, but you haven't captured everything, there's a part of you that's still not giving your appropriate attention to all that stuff. You're not that clear about which rabbit hole you need to be going down, right?
Yeah, because you may not
So
have captured all of the elements that go into that one thought.
yeah, well, and all the other thoughts about other rabbit holes that are going on, that might be pulling on your attention, that are maybe keeping you from being able to be fully focused on the one thing you want to develop into whatever detail you want.
Hmm.
So that's why they're generally speaking. I mean, there's no right or wrong about this. It's just generally speaking, you're going to be a lot more efficient if you get everything out of your head to begin with, and then run back through them one at a time, and then give yourself permission to then move into executive mode to make then decisions about it, what it means, and how much time or how much detail you might want to spend you know unpacking it.
Hmm. I still thinking about kind of like capturing ideas on a daily basis, things that kind of come to me at odd times. I still have my world famous GTD wallet, but what about people who don't have a notebook in their wallet? I mean, what do you recommend? I mean, in terms of, if you're out at a lunch, or you're watching TV or whatever else, what do you recommend there to be efficient?
Get a notebook. Have a notebook. I mean, once we designed the GTD note taker wallet, I'm surprised you still have one, because we still I still got one, and I thought I might make $1 million by once people saw this, and just all I could do is just go into the direct mail business, just sell this.
Yeah.
But people go, cost too much money. Why do I need all that? I don't need to carry a notepad and pen and
People, I'll
so
tell you, David, people see me pulling out my wallet and writing a quick note, and I get this question all the time: where did you get that? You
yeah,
might have
but
been
they're
ahead
not
of
willing.
your time.
They're not willing to go pay. We had this made. They're fabulous, whatever, and I think they cost something like 50 or 60 bucks. I don't know, maybe even not that much. And people go, I don't need to spend $50. Yeah, sorry. I so that was
So getting
so
a notebook, getting a
direct mail
notebook, and
business was not in my future. So
I know someone who carries a field notes a notebook in their back pocket, opposite from their wallet, and he does pretty much the same thing. He's always jotting things down. I've never felt comfortable, even though I'm pretty much digital in my approach to everything. I don't feel comfortable like pulling out my iPhone and entering something. I always think people think I'm,
There are too many clicks.
yeah, and people just think I'm not paying attention to them. Whereas if they see me writing something down, I think it's more acceptable. But the other thing that really kind of frustrates me is that, you know, we'll get things in emails or even text messages that pop up that are somewhat more, you know, a text message is difficult to capture. And it's difficult to remember that I got a text message that I got to transfer to something. Does that happen to you?
I don't get a lot of texts because I don't use my phone that much. And people know if they want to reach me, they better email me, you know, because I'm not a WhatsApp. I've got WhatsApp and I've got texts, you know, so forth, and I'll use those. But you know, usually I don't process any of that stuff unless I'm at my desk where I can cut and paste that stuff wherever I want it. So I don't do work out walking around. You know, you know, I might clean up spam or whatever on my email when I'm waiting in a line somewhere, or practice words with friends with, you know,
Mhm.
whatever. I just do kind of dumb, dorky stuff, but I don't do work.
Mhm.
Now I know there's a new generation that does a lot of the work they're doing with their thumbs. You know, I don't bother. I need access to the web. I need access to all of my stuff on my computer when I'm actually doing work, because it could go anywhere.
Mhm.
Might get a text and go, oh, that needs to be stored as a reference material on Catherine's and my reference database that we share. Or, oh, that needs to go here or there. So, you know, don't bother me with any of that stuff unless I'm at a place where I can actually manage that stuff well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I get a lot of digital information that I still want to do something with and need to decide what to do with.
I'm at the point where I'm trying to condense the number of inputs coming at me because it's difficult. But I mean, you know, I worked in an environment for a time where people wanted to have, you know, Slack chats or Slack messaging systems, and they were texting and everything else. And it was like, with if there's too many inputs, there's a greater chance of losing track of things. At least that's the way I viewed it.
Well, if you have the discipline, then you just do it. You just manage all of those inputs in the
Hmm.
same way you manage your mailbox and your in basket and your garbage and everything else. You manage it. If that's the nature of your commitments with your either professional or personal world, that you engage with those. But I hear you. You know,
Hmm.
so that's why social media to me is like as a cocktail party. I just wander in and out when I feel like it. So I don't feel any particular necessity about that.
Yeah.
LinkedIn is kind of a little bit of an exception to that. About every week or two, I sort of catch up with all the requests that I get for people to connect to me, and I get, you know, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen messages every week or two, you know, on LinkedIn. And I just take a look at those and I see whether or not I either am interested in responding to them or not. A lot of it's spam, a lot of it's just, you know, just advertising. But sometimes there's some very cool things and some cool relationships that come out of that. But I don't have a, gee, I need to every day, you know, clean that up or whatever. But I found it useful to clean it up every 2 or 3 weeks. So I
Hmm.
think there's different, you may have different inputs that you look at in different ways. But I hear you, Slack was a pain in the butt. When I was doing a big project, you know, and the other people on the project were using Slack and they wanted us to do it. So I did. But again, it's like this became another in basket I had to deal with. And,
Well, it's
and
all
off,
about creating discipline. You know, when people send you something on a text or Slack or whatever, they're really shifting the responsibility to me to now keep track of something that they're sending me from a different platform that I'm not equipped to easily capture from. And that's what I'm kind of struggling with. How do I streamline whatever inputs are coming at me so I don't lose
yeah,
track of things or make my life more complicated?
no, I hear you. But oftentimes a lot of that's because people are ambiguous about what they're asking you to do,
Right, right.
you know, and who it is and who's accountable for doing stuff about what they're asking you to do. Is that something you've given them permission to ask you, or or that you've taken on as an accountability to deal with? And
Hmm.
if so, life's like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've gotten
You just deal.
I've gotten pretty good at using Siri and using, some of those systems for capturing thoughts that, if I'm driving in the car, I don't want to stop and, write a note down. I know some people have a scratch pad in their shower. I haven't quite gotten to that point yet, but I think there's just, for me, there just has to be a general awareness of giving myself permission to capture ideas quickly when they come to me. Otherwise, they will be gone very quickly.
Indeed.
And
And you just have to have whatever tool that you can use to do that. I mean, back when I drove, haven't had a car for 7 years since we've been here, but back when I drove, and we, living in Southern California, we drove a lot. But I kept my little note taker wallet in the car open right where I was driving, because it was a lot easier to just grab the pin that was in the note and make a little note while I was driving than to try to record it somewhere or to do something else.
Mhm.
So life's not perfect. You just have to deal with whatever you need to deal with. And the digital capture, has gotten better and better. Uh, I use Siri to wake me up. Hey Siri, yo, hello David. Wake me up at 4:20 in the afternoon. Because I got an interview at 4:30. And so they said, so absolutely nothing wrong with those, and those are cool. The better they get, but you got to lower the barrier of entry to those things. Right. They better work, and you better trust them 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the limiting factors, is if there's any hitch in the get along in terms of any of those capture tools, you won't trust it.
Right.
You shouldn't. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a very valid point, David. I think that's true not only with capture, but I think it's true of any of all of the steps that I think make GTD successful. If there's any kind of resistance, if there's any kind of a hitch, as you call it, it's just very easy to get off target or off base, and the system kind of falls apart. You've got to streamline the whole process to make it work for you. At least that's what my experience has been.
Well, your system has to be better than your mind, or your mind can't let it go.
Right. I'm hoping that in future chats that you and I have, we can move on to the clarifying and other steps, because I've got a lot of questions to ask you about those as well. But is there anything else about the capture process or the mind sweep process that we've missed that you think have really helped other people get? Because some people say it's a difficult process.
No. No. Come on, Dave. I've said, how much more complex does this need to be? If it's on your mind and it's something that you have any attention about, that you might need to either decide or do something about later on, get it out of your head. What else is there to say? How you do that's obviously, you got all the creative options in terms of how you do that. But most people just have an addiction to keeping stuff in their head. I think it gives people, Dave, a false sense of control. That you feel like if you get it out of your head, you'll lose control of it. So I need to keep it in here. Otherwise, it may fall apart, and I'm feeling like it's falling apart anyway right now. So I don't want it to have it fall apart anymore. So keeping a sort of a constipated brain is a sort of gives people, I think, a false sense of control. And control is the master addiction.
Right.
Control is the fear of losing control is the greatest human fear. People are killing themselves and each other as you and I speak right now, as a way to either achieve or maintain a sense of psychological control. And that's a huge factor. And I think that's a lot, when you asked me initially, why do people resist doing this? I think if they feel like they're going to lose control if they get it out of their head.
I find this very interesting that well, let me share a comment with you. Somebody who watched one of our videos sent me a note, and I thought it was very, very perceptive. She said that, those of us who are practitioners of GTD, especially in the early years, we think this is a very complicated process. But one of the things she said she appreciates is watching you, because you seem to be calm and in kind of a Zen mode, where you've accomplished this, and like you're at the other end, the master teacher, and that's where we all want to be. We want to have that same calmness that you have about being organized and productive.
Well, thanks, but I go, God, this is not hard, guys. It's not hard. What, to get to this place or this space, I understand, people sort of appreciate that. And, that's been a lot of my, I'm a freedom kind of guy. I'm a relaxed kind of guy. I'm a spontaneous kind of guy. I mean, that's my style. That's where I feel the best, what I like to do. So I like to do the things that get me, into those states and keep me in those states. To me, that's cool. So that's how I came up with a lot of the GTD, processes. It's the work you need to do so you don't have to work so hard. So, what can I say? But again, there are some people, not a lot, but there's some people that get this immediately. They don't need to be 75 like I am to get it. They can get it once they kind of catch this idea. But I think what needs the biggest issue is, do they really get how cool it is to have nothing on your mind?
And it is. And it is. Well, David Allen, thank you very much for spending time with me. Again, I really always enjoy our chats, and I always learn something new. So you may not think it is complicated, and it really isn't, but it's helpful, I think, to talk through some of these steps with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. No, it's great to chat about this. I mean, most of what I've learned by trying to communicate it with other people and engage it with other people. So I learned something myself too. So yay. Thanks.
Before we go, just a quick message. You've probably been wondering what that information is at the bottom of the screen about my online class on productivity and time management. I want to first say that the course is not at all affiliated with David Allen or GTD, but I can tell you that for many, many, many years, I have been a student of productivity, and that's really how I got hooked on GTD. I have researched not only GTD methodology, but I've researched a lot of other time management tricks and productivity tools. And I put everything that I've learned into an online class, and I'd love you to check it out. It's everything inclusive of how to manage your time, your calendar, your email, how to deal with distractions at work. There's a lot packed into this self-paced 1-hour class. It's broken up into individual segments, so you can watch as much as you have time for. I've gotten great feedback from the course, and I'd really love you to check it out. Just go to my website, daveedwardsmedia.com, click on courses, you'll find it, and I know you'll be very happy if you, in fact, take the class. We'll be back with more episodes with David Allen in upcoming weeks, so please subscribe to this series so you won't miss any of them. And thanks for joining me.